I was 3 days from my 33rd anniversary at Alliance Metal Processing when Vasari Mercer called me into the glass conference room and tried to turn me into a file clerk. My name is Dean Bradley, and I am 54 years old. I started at the plant as a furnace tender when I was 21, back when the facility still ran 3 shifts and the heavy blast furnaces never went cold. The temperature gauges were analog then, with real metal needles that hummed and told you everything you needed to know if you had spent enough years learning how to read the vibrations in the floor. I worked my way up through every single department we had. I learned the heat treatment processes not from textbooks or slides, but from standing next to 2,400-degree furnaces for over 3 decades. By the time Valerie called that meeting, I was the senior plant engineer, and Apex Automotive Systems had my direct mobile number for when their steel shipments needed to meet precise carbon specifications. The temperature in that glass conference room felt cold the moment I stepped inside. Valerie was already seated, a printed document placed directly in front of her, her face arranged into a standard look she had probably practiced for board presentations. It was a mask of professional concern, like watching a pressure gauge climb slowly into the red zone. Next to her sat Darlene Briggs from Human Resources. Darlene was 38 years old and had been with the company for only 5 months. She came from a boutique consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring and workforce optimization, which was just a polite term for cutting heads. She had been talking about digital transformation and operational efficiency since her very first week on the job. I knew exactly what those buzzwords meant. It meant the leadership wanted the furnaces to run themselves according to automated spreadsheets, ignoring the human elements. "We want to discuss your role restructuring within the new organization," Valerie said. She slid the paper across the polished table. My job title was highlighted in bright yellow ink. Below it was a list of responsibilities that had absolutely nothing to do with what I actually did to keep the plant operational. The list consisted of process documentation, workflow analysis, digital system integration, and administrative oversight. There was not a single word about the emergency calls I took at midnight when the thermal profile of Furnace 3 went unstable. There was nothing about Keith Sinclair at Apex Automotive Systems, who had been calling me directly for 15 years because he knew that when a heat treatment batch fails specification with $1,100,000 in automotive steel at risk, you do not have time to wait in customer service queues. "We need you operating strictly within these parameters going forward," Valerie said. She had the practiced, icy calm of someone who had delivered this corporate speech many times before. She explained that it creates clearer accountability and aligns with their new digital initiatives. I looked at the paper, then at Darlene, who was typing on her tablet, and finally at Valerie, who was studying my face like a temperature reading she could not quite interpret. "I understood," I replied. "I will follow this description exactly." Walking back to my workstation, I ran the financial numbers in my head. Our home mortgage had 5 years left on the term. My wife, Colleen, was building her independent accounting practice, but it was not a steady source of income yet. Our son, Sean, was deployed overseas with the Army Corps of Engineers, and we were covering his monthly student loan payments of $620 while he was in the field. Our daughter, Megan, was planning her wedding for next spring, and we had committed $17,000 to help cover the catering and venue. They were all counting on my steady salary, and Valerie knew that. That was why she looked so comfortable and confident in her chair. But what Valerie did not understand about 33 years of thermal expertise was that knowledge does not simply disappear when you write a new job description. It relocates, and I had some choices about where it would land. That very afternoon, Keith sent his usual urgent message. The carbon content in the Furnace 2 batch was running high. He wanted to know if I could walk his team through the cooling sequence to bring the specification back into tolerance. For 15 years, I would have had him on the phone in under 2 minutes. I knew that furnace the way a watchmaker knows a movement he has adjusted 1,000 times. I knew which temperature probe read 15 degrees low because of thermal lag from the refractory installation. Keith's engineers did not know that, and neither did anyone else at Alliance Metal Processing. I opened the new job description Valerie had given me, read the highlighted lines once more, and typed my reply to Keith. I wrote that he should direct all technical support requests to our customer solutions team, as my current role was strictly limited to process documentation and administrative oversight. I hit send and waited. The silence lasted exactly 18 minutes before my phone started ringing. The first call was from Sylvia Castillo, our Vice President of Operations. "Dean," she said, her voice tight, "I just got an incredibly frantic message from Keith Sinclair over at Apex. He says you refused to help him. What is going on down there?" I took a slow breath, looking down at my new document. "I am simply operating within the official scope that Human Resources and Valerie provided to me this morning, Sylvia. If you would like me to resume active technical support duties, I will need that change reflected in writing." She sighed, a sound of pure frustration. "Come on, Dean. We have known each other a long time. We are all working toward the same goals here." I told her I was happy to support those goals, but they needed to update my job description first. She hung up without another word. Valerie called me 6 minutes later. The confident ease she had shown in the glass conference room was already cooling down. "Dean," she said, "Apex is our largest account. We cannot afford to play games. We need some flexibility from you here." I told her I understood completely. I told her that if she added live technical support and client troubleshooting back to my written scope of work, "We do not need to revise any formal documentation," she said, her tone hardening. "Just use good judgment." I replied that my judgment told me to follow the precise written parameters she had provided to me. She slammed the receiver down. By 6 o'clock in the evening, my phone showed 14 missed calls. Every single one of them was some version of the same message: "Fix this." Yet none of those managers were willing to put in writing what they had been perfectly comfortable expecting me to do for years without any official acknowledgement. They did not want to document that my real job, the job Alliance Metal Processing actually needed done to survive, was nothing like the administrative clerk position they had put on that highlighted paper. What none of them knew was that I had spent the entire afternoon being very productive. I was writing process documentation, which was exactly what my job description instructed me to do. I created beautiful, detailed, and technically precise documents covering every heat treatment protocol, every furnace calibration sequence, and every cooling curve for the steel specifications that Apex required. They were masterpiece documents, but they were completely useless to anyone who had never stood next to those massive furnaces and learned to read the thermal patterns like a language. I also made one phone call that was definitely not in my job description. I dialed Keith Sinclair directly on his personal cell phone, bypassing the Apex mainline. "Keith," I said, "I do not want to get into the details, but things are shifting over here at the plant. If something comes up and your normal communication channels are not working, call me directly. Not the company, but my personal number." He was quiet for a moment, the hum of his own office in the background. "Are you all right, Dean?" he asked. I told him I was just covering my bases, and he said he understood. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with Colleen and laid everything out. I placed our monthly bills on one side of the table and my notes on the other. Our mortgage payment was $2,150. The student loan coverage we were handling for Sean was $620 a month. Megan's wedding expenses were sitting at $17,000, which we had promised to pay. My retirement contributions were something I could not afford to touch if we wanted to survive long term. Colleen listened to me without interrupting, which is one of the many things about her I have never taken for granted in our 34 years of marriage. "Do you think they are planning to let you go?" she asked, looking at the spreadsheet. "They are building a case," I said. "Or at least, they think they are." "And what does your case look like?" I tapped the thick folder sitting next to my coffee cup. It contained every email, every call log, the original job description from when I was promoted to senior engineer, and the new one Valerie had handed me. I explained that the gap between those two documents was where my 33 years of real work lived. If they fired me, they would have to pay a massive severance package, and I had documentation that would prove constructive discharge under California labor laws. If they did not fire me, I would just keep following the administrative job description they gave me. Colleen looked at me with that familiar smile she had given me since we were in our 20s, showing she knew I had already made my choice. "We will figure it out," she said. "We always do." The pressure at the plant escalated quickly after that. By Wednesday, I had been quietly removed from 2 weekly production meetings that I had personally run for 11 years. Then, my access to the real-time furnace monitoring system was suspended. The IT ticket claimed it was a routine security review. But I knew Valerie had decided that if I was not going to cooperate, she would accelerate her timeline to push me out. What she failed to realize was that you can revoke a login, but you cannot revoke 33 years of understanding how steel behaves under extreme thermal stress. On Thursday morning, Valerie walked directly to my desk. There was no conference room this time, and Darlene was not there to back her up. She stood near the edge of my partition, her arms crossed, looking at me with a mixture of impatience and calculation. "Dean," she said, "I want to be entirely direct with you." I told her I would appreciate that. She went on to explain that the company was going through a major strategic transition, and that, while she believed there was still a place for me in the organization, it would require a significant amount of adaptation on my part. I slowly saved the process document I was working on, which was exactly the administrative work they had ordered me to do, and looked up at her face. "Valerie," I said, "I am being completely adaptable. I am doing precisely what you and Darlene outlined on Monday morning. If you want a different outcome, the solution is very simple." I pointed directly at the printed job description taped to the side of my computer monitor. "Update that document to reflect my engineering and support duties." Her jaw tightened, and she walked away without saying another word. That afternoon, I received a phone call from an area code I did not expect. It was a call from the old company founder, Wallace Crawford. Wallace was 82 years old and lived in retirement, but he had built Alliance Metal Processing from a small machine shop into a major industry supplier before selling to the investment group that had installed Valerie as the chief executive. "Dean," his voice was still as sharp as a newly ground blade, "I have been talking to Keith Sinclair, and someone forwarded me an email chain that has me deeply concerned. Tell me what is going on." I told him the entire story, from the glass conference room meeting to the restricted database access. I also told him about something I had discovered through an IT system administrator who was a loyal friend. Valerie and Darlene had created a backdated performance improvement plan and forged my signature on it to build a paper trail. They wanted to terminate me for cause to avoid paying my severance and to circumvent the 60-day notification requirements of the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, which applied because of the large-scale layoffs they were planning. Wallace listened without interrupting, a trait I had always respected. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. "I sold to the wrong people," he said. "I have known it for 24 months. I want you to know you have my full support, Dean. My contact list in this industry is still very comprehensive." That call lasted 15 minutes, but it handed me something no severance package could match, which was credibility and an open door to 50 years of contacts. The crisis hit on the following Tuesday. Furnace 2 went down hard, not due to a minor sensor error, but because of a complete thermal system failure. Keith's engineering team had been attempting to work around an underlying cooling issue for 6 days, and the system had finally collapsed under the strain. With Furnace 2 offline, Furnace 1 began experiencing severe thermal instability, showing random temperature spikes of over 300 degrees every 90 to 110 minutes. I knew exactly what it was. The secondary refractory lining was failing, a problem I had flagged in my personal engineering log back in June, but had not included in the official, sanitized reports Valerie demanded. Apex Automotive Systems had $1,600,000 in specialized automotive steel staged for a critical Friday shipment. If they missed the deadline, their assembly plants would shut down. Keith called my personal cell phone at 6:45 in the morning. "Dean," he said, his voice raw from lack of sleep, "I am not calling the plant, I am calling you. How bad is it? I told him both furnaces were failing and that the corporate customer solutions team would only bounce him through endless ticketing queues. I told him I could not help him as an employee of Alliance, but I was submitting my personal leave request. As of tomorrow morning, I would be available as an independent thermal systems contractor. What will that cost us? Keith asked. I quoted my price. $60,000 for the emergency stabilization and another $20,000 to write the permanent solutions and documentation. That was $80,000 total. I knew it was a steep figure, but I also knew what was at stake for them. Keith told me to hang on. 20 minutes later, he called back. Our legal team confirmed that emergency consulting falls completely outside our exclusive service agreement with Alliance. Send me the contract template. I called Colleen on my drive home and told her the news. She was quiet for a second before telling me she would make the chili I liked. My personal leave request was submitted at 9:30 the next morning, and by 10:20 Valerie was on the phone, her voice shaking with anger. Dean, she said, her voice tight, I see that you have submitted a request for personal leave. Given the critical situation with Apex Automotive Systems, this timing is highly problematic. I told her that it was indeed personal leave and that I had 28 accrued days available. I reminded her that Alliance company policy explicitly allowed employees to use their accrued leave with 24 hours of notice for personal matters. I understand the policy, Dean, she replied, but I am asking you as the head of this company to reconsider the timing of your request. I told her that I appreciated her perspective, but my request stood. Valerie then pivoted to a different tactic. We are also hearing from Keith Sinclair that Apex may be engaging an outside contractor for emergency engineering support. I want to make it very clear to you that Alliance Metal Processing has an exclusive service agreement with Apex. Any outside consulting work you perform that conflicts with that exclusive agreement will create massive legal exposure for you. Personally, I had been waiting for this exact threat. Valerie, I said calmly, I suggest you take a close look at Section 7 of the Alliance Service Agreement with Apex. It states that Alliance covers standard thermal processing, scheduled maintenance, and routine technical support. Emergency thermal systems consulting is explicitly excluded from that exclusive scope. Keith's legal team reviewed the contract yesterday, and they agree completely. I would encourage you to have your own corporate legal counsel look at that section before you make any more empty legal threats. Have a good day. I drove over to the Apex facility and met Keith at the main entrance. The morning air was cool, but inside the plant, the atmosphere was thick with tension. He looked like a man who had not slept in days, with dark circles under his eyes and a half-empty cup of stale coffee in his hand. We shook hands and walked out onto the production floor without speaking much. That was how it had always been with Keith. We did not need to waste words when there was work to be done. The factory floor was far too quiet for a Tuesday morning. A few junior technicians were standing near Furnace 1, staring at digital tablets and running software diagnostics that were never going to find the real physical problem. Furnace 2 was completely dark and cold, standing like a giant dead monument in the middle of the shop floor. Walk me through what your team has already checked, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the background hum of the remaining machinery. Keith handed me a clipboard with their diagnostic logs. They had checked the temperature sensors, the gas feed pressure, and the fuel system calibrations. Everything was technically within tolerance, which meant they were looking at symptoms instead of the actual root cause of the failure. I walked over to Furnace 2 and stood next to the main chamber, closing my eyes to listen to the machine. That might sound like a story written for dramatic effect, but after 33 years of working with these systems, it is how you work. Every furnace has a unique thermal signature, and when something goes wrong, that signature changes in ways that a spreadsheet will never capture. I stood there for about 9 minutes, listening to the hum of the blowers and the cycle of the valves. There was a tiny irregularity in the cooling cycle interval, maybe 30 seconds off the standard profile. Most engineers would never have noticed it, but I felt it in the soles of my boots. Your refractory lining on the secondary chamber has been failing, I told Keith. It has been running slightly hot for months. On its own, Furnace 2 was able to compensate, but once Furnace 1 started pulling gas from the same line during peak production cycles, the thermal variance began to compound. That is the source of your instability. Keith stared at me, his eyes wide. How did you know where to look when our diagnostic tools showed nothing? He asked. I told him I had noticed the initial indicators back in June and written them down in my personal notebook, which was part of the engineering oversight they had stripped from my job. We did not need to debate the matter. We needed to get the plant running. We replaced the failing refractory blocks that afternoon. The materials were already in the Apex maintenance inventory because I had recommended they stock that specific component 4 years ago. By 6:30 in the evening, Furnace 2 was back to its exact specification. By Thursday evening, the thermal instability on Furnace 1 had cleared up completely. Keith stood next to me on the floor, watching both furnaces run smoothly. What would have happened if you were still sitting at your desk writing process documentation? He asked. I did not answer. We both knew the answer. Valerie called me on Friday morning while I was finishing my final diagnostic reports at the Apex facility. Dean, she said, her voice dropping all the corporate warmth she usually attempted to project. We understand that you have been working on site at Apex as an outside contractor while on leave. This puts Alliance in a very complicated position. I smiled, looking through the glass at the furnaces running perfectly. I am on personal leave. Valerie, I replied. What I do during my approved leave is my own concern, provided it does not violate a valid non-compete. Your legal department has now had 72 hours to review the Apex service agreement. I am guessing they confirmed what Keith's legal team found on Monday. There was a long silence. Finally, she spoke. We would like to discuss bringing you back into the organization, she said. I told her immediately that I was not interested in returning as an employee. If Alliance wishes to engage my services under a consulting agreement, you can put a formal proposal in writing. She sent a draft contract the next morning, offering an annual retainer of $85,000 with a vague, open-ended scope. I forwarded it to Wallace Crawford. Wallace did not reply to me directly. Instead, he called Keith Sinclair that afternoon. Keith told me later that Wallace had asked what the future of the Apex account looked like if Alliance failed to secure my services. Keith had told him honestly that without my expertise, Apex would reevaluate their relationship. Wallace suggested Keith share that with Valerie. The revised offer arrived in my inbox 3 days later. They offered $80,000 for completing the process documentation, a $160,000 annual retainer for ongoing consulting, and a right of first refusal on 7% equity if Alliance was sold within 4 years. Valerie signed the document after Keith's procurement department sent notice they were evaluating alternative suppliers. The total first-year value of the agreement was $240,000, far more than I had ever earned in a year as an employee. I sat in my truck and called Colleen. It is done, I said. We have $80,000 for documentation and $160,000 a year, plus the equity. She was quiet for several seconds. Come home, Dean, she said. I am making that chili you like. 2 weeks after signing the agreement, Colleen and I sat across from Miriam Cole, our financial advisor. Miriam laid out the charts. With this new consulting revenue, you can retire at 54 instead of 61, she said. If the Apex retainer is renewed, you could retire at 52. Colleen reached over and squeezed my arm. Miriam showed us another page. The wedding expenses for Megan can be paid in full without touching your retirement savings. That night, I called Megan. Dad, is everything okay? She asked. It is better than okay, I said. Your mother and I are covering your wedding expenses. You do not need to worry about the budget. She was silent. Are you serious, Dad? I am completely serious, I replied. I told her I had finally stopped doing 2 jobs for the price of one. She laughed. That bright sound she had made since she was a little girl. It is about time, she said. The following week, Dwight Preston called. Dwight had worked at Alliance for 10 years. Valerie had pushed him out 8 weeks after my departure. I heard what you did, Dwight said. Are you looking for a partner? Within 60 days, Bradley Preston Consulting was a registered business. By the end of month 4, we had 6 steady clients, and Dwight brought in 4 more. We did not want 70 employees. We just wanted to do good work. 18 months after I left Alliance, Valerie asked to meet for coffee. She looked older, the confidence in her eyes replaced by exhaustion. Alliance had lost 3 major accounts after mismanaged furnace failures. We cannot fill the knowledge gap, she admitted, holding her cup. Young engineers know the theory, but they panic when a furnace fails. I want to understand what I did wrong. I looked at her face. You do not fix a knowledge gap by rewriting a job description, I said. You fix it by valuing the expertise before the crisis, not after. The unofficial layer of a worker's job is the most expensive thing to lose. When the check arrived, she reached for it, but I shook my head and paid. She stared at me, then let out a genuine laugh and handed me her card. 4 months later, a handwritten note arrived from Wallace Crawford. Dean, I heard you were speaking at the Great Lakes Manufacturing Summit. Save me a seat in the front row. Proud of you. That note is framed on my office wall today. If this story sounds familiar, you have probably spent decades building knowledge that does not show up on an org chart. When younger managers try to tell you that your work can be captured in a job description and done by someone cheaper, do not believe them. The question is not whether your experience has value, but whether you will let them set the price. You are not overhead. You are the reason the systems run. Act like it.